Hello everyone, it's Nina. Thanks for joining me today for a new video. Today I'm going to be sharing 5 different projects that I made with Simon Says Stamps November 2023 card kit, which is Cozy Autumn Hugs. Now that the weather is turning cooler, I'm definitely feeling the soups, the sweaters, and fall cards. So I'm going to share the projects that I made today using the kit contents, and hopefully they'll inspire you to make some really pretty cards. And if you're interested, purchase the kit, which I have links to down below in the video description and over on my blog too, so you can check it all out there. I wanted to start first by making some tags. There are some label tag dies included in the kit that I designed for this card kit, and I'm going to die cut the pattern paper that's included with these tags, and I'm also going to die cut some of the cardstock. For any of the tags that I die cut from the pattern paper, I also die cut a second tag from plain white cardstock, so that way it'd have a nice, beautiful, simple background on the back side of this tag, which gives me a really nice, clean place to write. There are also some great embossing folders in this kit, and I'm going to use this large embossing folder here. This one is the Wistful Leaves embossing folder, and I thought it'd be fun to die cut my label tag die from some blue cardstock that's in the kit and then emboss it with the embossing folder. So this is going to give me a really nice, beautiful pattern on top of this tag that gives this a lot of texture. My idea was to make a set of tags that are all layered together that I could then put onto a gift, which I think would be super fun. I know this is a little over the top, but I think it's such a cool embellishment for a gift. So I did this again. I die cut 2 more pieces of cardstock with the other label tag dies, and I'm going to put these inside of the embossing folder, and I'm kind of trying to pick which leaves I want on each of these pieces. So that way I get some really nice interest on these. We're basically decorating these tags with the embossing, so I wanted them to make sure that they stood out with a nice design. So here you can see we have this really nice border along this tag, and then I used one of the leaves as a center focal point for this little tiny tag. So these are all going to get layered up together to create this really fun layered tag collection. I'm going to ink blend on top of the embossed tags just to give them some dimension. Especially for these 2 larger tags, I wanted to just add some darker color around the edges, which will highlight the embossing in the center. For the smaller tag, I'm actually going to color in that little leaf. I'm tying these together with some twine. I just picked out some twine that I had in my stash, and I'm going to loop it through all the tags and then tie a little knot, leaving it loose so that way the tags can float around on this string. So this is going to allow them to fan out, which looks really pretty. I'm picking out one of the greetings from the Cozy Autumn Hugs stamp set. I'm going to stamp this with Merlot ink from Simon Says Stamp onto some Nina Desert Storm cardstock. As you can see, the colors that I'm using here are very warm and perfect for fall. I really was inspired by a lot of the colors that are in the kit, which is where my inspiration for the ink colors that I'll use throughout all of my cards today was derived from. It's always fun to embellish your tags with some of the paper pieces. So I actually die cut the bottom of one of my pattern paper sheets with the labeled tags die, so that way I could have this really nice border. And then I put a small piece of matte gold cardstock along the top of that to trim it up, which looks really beautiful. And when it peeks out from behind our other tags, you get that really nice pop of gold. For the sentiment, I popped that up with some foam tape along the leaf tag that's in the middle. This one I had cut from pattern paper at the beginning of this video. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I did color in that little leaf that was on top of the final tag that sits on top. And I just used some Perfection ink to ink blend with a little blending brush on top of the leaf, very light, just so that way I could get the leaf colored. I also added a little bit of orange ink around the edges to warm up the tag just a bit. This gave it a little bit more color and also softened it up a little bit, so when it's sitting on top of all these other tags, it looks really pretty. Okay, that was project number 1. The rest of the projects are all cards, so if you're looking for card inspiration, stay tuned. We're going to be making 4 cards today. But I think this tag would be amazing to put on a little gift if you have something for somebody's birthday, or if you want to bring a hostess gift for Thanksgiving. This would be amazing to put on top of that. All right, I love the stencils that are in this kit. These are the Autumn Frame Layering Stencils. It's 2 stencils, and you can see I actually already embossed my white cardstock with the Wistful Leaves embossing folder that we used for the tags. So I embossed that onto just some plain white cardstock, and I'm going to stick that onto my stamp and stencil mat from Simon Says Stamp, and then my stencil is going to go on top of the paper so that way I can start ink blending these beautiful leaves through the stencil on top of our embossing. By embossing first, it's giving the paper a little bit of texture, and it's going to add some leaves behind these leaves, which will give some interest to this background. I used a variety of different Simon Says stamp inks, both Simon's premium dye inks and also positively saturated inks. Both of these inks are dye-based, so you can interchangeably use them together, and I really like the colors that I use here. Some of them from the premium dye inks are burnt orange and merlot. When I'm coloring my leaves, instead of using just one color for each piece, I'm actually using multiple colors. So I'm mixing reds and oranges together, yellows and oranges, and that's giving me some variation to my leaves, which is perfect for fall because when you look at fall leaves, they are generally multiple colors, not just one shade. So I liked being able to mix and match my colors here to be able to get a very authentic fall feel. So I removed the first layer, and now we're going to bring in the stem layer, and we're going to actually use paste for this. You could use a brown ink or whatever color you'd like, but I thought it'd be fun to use this really pretty stencil butter. I have it linked below in the video description and on my blog. It's beautiful, adds a nice subtle sparkle to this, and it really enhances the beauty of those leaves. Once it dried, I brought in some more ink, and I'm going to ink blend around the edges of my cardstock to give this a really nice halo of color. So I picked out two different oranges. It was melon and burnt orange from Simon's Stamp, and that's going to give me this really nice halo of color here. I'm leaving the center white so that way it glows a little bit, and it'll also frame up our sentiment nicely. So here is our background. It looks beautiful. But if you didn't want to use the paste, you could simply just ink blend this. Here's another panel that I did with the same concept, but instead of using paste for the stem layer, I just used some ink. So it's totally up to you how you want to do it. And I did switch up the colors on the background. On the panel on the left, I used some brown ink instead of orange. So it made it a little bit more subdued, which I like. I'll show you how I turn that into a card after we finish up this beautiful orange one. So I also embossed a piece of burnt orange cardstock from the kit with that Wistful Leaves embossing folder, and I'm going to attach this panel that's slightly smaller than the 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch panel I have here. This is going to mat up our beautiful leaf frame, and because I embossed both of these pieces, I made sure to line up the embossing from the panel on top with the panel in the background, so that way it continues that embossed design across the entire card. And I'll glue this entire piece then onto an A2 size card. So I have a piece of dark chocolate cardstock from Simon that I'm stamping with one of the greetings from the Cozy Autumn Hugs stamp set. I'm going to use some gold embossing powder. This is Simon Says Stamp Antique Gold. It's perfect for fall and the holidays. It's such a warm color of gold. I love it. It's one of my favorites. And I'm going to use my heat tool to set that on top of this dark colored cardstock, which will make the sentiment jump out really nicely. And it also stands out beautifully amongst our beautiful leaves. So this sentiment is the perfect finishing touch to this card. It's a simple design, but all the details of the embossing and the stenciling added such a beautiful finishing touch to this card project. Okay, so we saw that background that I had made as an alternative to the one we just did. This one just was the same process of ink blending through the stencil, but I did not emboss the paper, and I used the stem layer with ink. So we have a little bit of variation to the first card here. And on this one, I'm going to stamp a sentiment in the middle, and I'm going to do some stamp shading with this. So I first stamped with melon, and now I'm going to bring in sherbet, and I'm going to put that along the bottom of the sentiment. I'm going to use a blending brush to feather out that ink so it softens it up a little bit, so it'll transition nicely into the melon color that we've already stamped down. So now that I have that stamped, I'm going to carefully pick that back up, put more ink along the bottom, and this time I used Woodsy, softened it again with a blending brush, and then stamped it back down over top of my original stamping. So now we get this really cool gradation on the sentiment. And I finished things off by adding a secondary greeting underneath, which I'll stamp with Merlot ink. By going through the trouble of stamping the sentiment with those extra colors and creating that shading effect, it makes the sentiment stand out. And for this card, which is going to be a completely one-layer card, this makes it a little bit more extra special. So here we go. Simple cards to put together, but have beautiful finishing touches that make them stand out as their own card. So I love how this one here looks so dimensional by adding those different colors of ink together to create the two-toned leaves, the stamping that features that beautiful gradation of color. All of that provides a lot of dimension to this card, but it's one layer and it would be super easy to mail. Now, speaking of dimension, we're going to go the opposite way now. We're going to add a lot of dimension on this card. So there's this adorable embossing folder. It's actually an embossing folder that cuts at the same time. This one's called Moon and Pines. And I embossed it with some blue cardstock that's included in the kit. I love how it cuts out the moon there, so you could put some colored cardstock behind it, which is what I'm going to do. But before I do that, I want to enhance those trees and the embossing by spreading some ink over top. So I'm taking a white pigment ink pad and I'm dragging it across the embossed areas. And it's going to get on the background a little bit, but that was kind of the look I was going for. I want it to be a little more distressed. I'll set that aside because that one's wet. I did do one off camera that's completely dry, and you can see how that beautiful moon behind the trees looks so good. I made that by simply cutting a small piece of gold cardstock that was a little larger than the moon area and glued that behind. So just like that, I really quickly have a beautiful scene that I can put now on top of some of the pattern paper that's in the kit. I'm going to glue my scene first though onto some cream cardstock, so that way I can matte that up a little bit. It'll separate the two different colors, the dark blue and this gold color, from each other, and just provide a little bit of contrast. It makes the scene stand out nicely on top of the pattern paper, but that gold in the pattern paper draws really well with the gold moon that we have here. I put this onto a 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 square card. I love how square cards always look so cute, especially when you have nesting squares like this. It creates such a beautiful draw for your eye. I'm going to keep the card pretty simple, and I'm going to stamp a single line greeting from the stamp set onto some of the dark chocolate cardstock that I've been using throughout this video. I also used the same antique gold embossing powder to sprinkle on top, and I'll heat set that so that way I have a really nice pretty gold greeting that I can stick along the bottom of my trees. I used my Tim Holtz trimmer to trim this down so it's a nice thin little strip. I'll glue this down with some foam tape. That way it gives it some dimension. So we do have a lot of dimension on this card. You could save on the dimension and just adhere everything down with some tape runner or liquid glue. It's totally up to you, but I do love the look of dimension. I finished things off by adding a few little gem stickers here. Orange ones were my choice because I thought that would really tie in the warmth of the card and give this a perfect autumn evening feel. I tied a small piece of twine around the bottom of my card, tied it into a little bow. I always love twine on fall cards. It gives it some extra warmth, which I think is really fun, and it's not too bulky. So even if you were trying to make this a non-bulky card and mail it, the twine would not add too much bulk to your project. So there we have it, another fabulous card using the kit contents. I love the gold. The gold is what makes this card stand out so beautifully. And the embossed details on those trees, I love how the white ink brought them out and makes them stand out amongst all of that beauty. Okay, final card, and probably no surprise, it's an edge-to-edge shaker card. I love making them, as you know. If you watch my videos, you see me make them all the time. I thought it'd be fun to use some of the pattern paper as a background for my edge-to-edge shaker. So I pulled out that same incredibly grateful greeting that we used earlier, but this time instead of stamping it with colored ink, we're going to emboss it. So I stamped it with embossing ink, used that same antique gold embossing powder to sprinkle on top. I'll heat set this and then I'll cut it out so that way I can glue this down on top of my edge-to-edge shaker card. My edge-to-edge shaker is going to be made with this pretty pattern paper. There's some great pattern papers in this kit, very beautiful fall patterns. I thought the mushrooms were super fun, so I'm going to use that as the backdrop. I'm going to put some Terrific tape from Simon's Stamp on the back side of my paper, and I'm going to put it around all 4 edges. I've also cut a piece of plastic down to be slightly larger than this panel, which is slightly smaller than an A2 card. I removed the release paper off of 3 sides of the adhesive strips, leaving that 4th side still intact because I do need to be able to fill this up before I enclose everything with the plastic. So we've gone ahead and folded over those 3 edges. I will take my scissors and trim off any excess that might be hanging off the sides. And now I can bring in some sequins. These are beautiful rose gold sequins from Simon's Stamp, and I thought these would be perfect as the filler for this card. So I dumped them in, shook them up to see if I liked the fill. Once I was happy with it, then I can remove that final release paper on the back side of my shaker and fold the plastic into it so it captures all those sequins inside. And so that gives me this really fun, beautiful shaker. Those sequins really draw out the colors in the mushrooms, which I think is fun. And I just put this card panel on top of an A2 card that I made from Nina Desert Storm cardstock. I put my sentiment on top of this edge-to-edge shaker using some foam tape along the bottom here. That dark chocolate cardstock looks really good against this dark background, and so that gold sentiment really pops. There's some fun border strips included in the pattern paper, so I cut them down. I'm going to use this one here. That's a darker color. It has some fall words in it, which I thought tied nicely together with this design. So I'm going to glue that down along the bottom, and then I also tied a little bit more twine onto this card too, following along that same border, so that way everything has a very nice cohesive feel. This card has a lot of good linear lines, which grounds everything nicely, and I love that little touch of twine on top of the card. I never get tired of edge stitch shaker cards. I could make these all the time, which I kind of already do. All right, well, there we have it. 5 different things that you can make with Simon Says Stamp's November 2023 card kit called Cozy Autumn Hugs. If you like the kit, I have it linked below in the video description and on my blog for you to check out, along with any of the other products that I use today. I hope you were inspired by these projects. I hope you got something out of it, and we'll try out some of the ideas that I've shared today. So until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching.